Homish and Rashi, welcome to the Torah portion, Shemini. We're in the third reading. And today we get a different taste of things. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam shehakol mibareh. Let us get right into it. The takes say, page 730 in the Chitas book. Tate say, and a fire went out befnei Hashem, before God. V'teichal ala mizbeach, and it ate, meaning it consumed, ala mizbeach. Right, these were the offerings now on the altar. Continuation of yesterday, that Aaron did all of the service, and now what happened to all the divine service on the altar? So a fire went out from before God, and it consumed on the altar Esa'ila, the fire offering, the scent offering, Vesa Chalavim, and the fats, V'yar Sa'am, and the people saw, V'yareinu, and they sang a praise, V'yiplu, and they fell, Apneihem, on their faces. In other words, bowing down. Rashi only picks up on the word V'yareinu. It says it means, Kitarguma is Unkelis translates it, and they praised. They praised, they sang words of praise. Got it? They sang words of praise. You know what that word is, by the way? Familiar with that word? It's my name. Ronnie means my song. My here means a song of praise. Do you know that, Shemini? Okay, V'yichol b'nei Aaron, and they took the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Each machtasoi, each person a fire pan they took. V'yitnu b'hem eish, and they placed upon this fire pan fire. Yasimu aleha, and they put on it, and now they placed on it keteiris, incense. V'yakrivu lifnei Hashem, and they brought it before God. They brought the incense before God. Right? Eish zara she'lo tziva isam, a foreign fire that they were not commanded. No Rashi. Right. Now look at the similarity. Before in verse 24, we said a fire went out before God. Now it says also Teitzei Mifnei Hashem. Also a fire went out before God, but Teichal Oisam, it consumed them. Veyamus, and they died, Lifnei Hashem, before God. Rashi. In verse 2, it says V'teitzei Eish. Oh, today's learning is for the Yurtzeit of Pinchas Meir ben Chana, whose Yurtzeit is today. May his neshama have an aliyah and go from strength to strength. So Rashi says on the second verse, for Teitzei Eish, a fire went out. Rabbi Elazar Meir. So there's a dispute why they died. Why did they die? Right? So Rabbi Elazar says, Lemesa b'nei Aaron, the sons of Aaron did not die ela al yedei shahira halach b'fnei Moshe Rabbeinu. The only reason they died is because they rendered a halachic decision in the presence of their teacher Moshe. Right. And that's why the reason why the fire descended on the altar from heaven was still incumbent upon the Kohanim to light it from fire on it. That's what it means, an alien fire that God did not command. In other words, they they gave a halachic ruling that on the altar you don't have to give a fire because God will bring a fire from heaven, right? And that's why it says the exact same words. Hashem, right? That a fire went out from before God. And also in the previous word, a fire went out before God. That's the connection, right? The similarity of a teichal, and it consumed. Here it consumed the animals on the altar. Here it consumed them. Why? Because they gave this ruling, although correct that God would, but they did it before Moshe. In other words, it wasn't their place to do that, and therefore a fire came out before God and consumed them. So they died because they were not to give this halachic ruling. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shmuel, on the other hand, he says, they were intoxicated by wine, nichnasu lemikdash, and they entered into the sanctuary. Teda, you should know with certainty that this is the reason for the death. She'achem is also because after their death, he's on the sarim. The Torah warns the remaining kahanim, that no one who is intoxicated by wine should enter into the sanctuary. Mashal this can be compared metaphorically to a king, Shayela ben Bayis, that he had a household member. He said, as it says in the Medrash. There it reads that a king had trusted a household member. He once found him standing at the entrance of some stores and without explanation had the household member head cut off. He appointed another member of the household in his stead. We would not know why he killed the first one. He killed the first one, except that he commanded and he gave to the second one to not go through the entrance of the stores through it. And we know that he killed the first one because he transgressed that command. In other words, it doesn't say here why they were killed, why they died in the sanctuary, right? But the fact that it says in the second, right after that, don't come intoxicated from there, that gives an indication over here. Again, that's the metaphor of the king that, tells his trusty servant, don't go there. And he went there. He cut off his head, but we don't know that he told him that. We only know because he told the next guy, don't go there. Right? That's a second explanation. Interesting. Might have time to go through this and understand, deeper understanding here. Okay, verse number 3. Yeah, we're good? Page 730. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 730. V'yamer Moshe el Aaron, and Moshe said to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem. This is what God spoke, Lamar, saying, B'kroi v'akadosh, with my nearest ones, my closest ones, I will become sanctified. V'apnei kol ha'am yikabed, and upon the entire people, I will be honored. Aaron, and Aaron was silent. In other words, he accepted what Moshe said, and he accepted what happened. Right? He didn't cry. At this point, at least, maybe another time. But that's okay. Who Asher Diber? This is what God spoke. Hey, Chandiba. So Rashi asks, where did God say this? Right. And so he brings the verse in Exodus in chapter 29, verse 43. That says there, and I will meet there the children of Israel, meaning in the sanctuary, and it will be sanctified through my honor. and it will be sanctified through my honor. Now remember, Torah is written without vowels, so the sages say, Al tikra b'chvedi, don't read that I will be through my honor, I will be, I will be sanctified there. Ela b'chvedi, but rather with my honored ones. In other words, I'm going to be sanctified. God will be sanctified by his honored ones. So this is the death of Nadav and Avihu. In other words, they're honored ones of God, and God's being sanctified through them. Right? Moshe said to Aaron, Aaron Achi, Aaron my brother, Yedea, I knew that the Mishkan, the house of God, would become sanctified with those who are very close to God. I knew that. But I was under the impression that it would become sanctified or through me or you. Now I see that they are greater than me and you. Right? Because God becomes sanctified through them, so that means they were on a holier level. Of course, we need to understand how that fits in with the fact that they, brought a foreign fire that was not commanded. Of course, is a good question. Yidam Aaron, and Aaron was silent. Kibel schar. And for that, he received a reward. What was his reward? On his silence. In other words, his acceptance. Maschar Kibel, what was his reward? That God directed to him alone. That was said to him alone, the next part of the Torah, which is about don't come into the sanctuary intoxicated with wine. God told it to him alone, not with Moshe, which is of course unusual, right? Most things, 99% of things were told just to Moshe. Moshe told Aaron, right? Some things were told to both of them together, but this was told only to Aaron. That's his reward, that he accepted the judgment. Yeah, that's it. That's what we just said.
I know, but what I want to ask is, was this the only time that Hashem spoke to him directly, or was the case from then on, he would be hearing from Hashem?
Yeah. I think it was the only time that only him.
Okay.
There are a few times that was him and Moshe. But I think it's the only, if I recall correctly, it's the only time. Actually, I take that back. I don't know if there were things that God had spoken that was meant for Moshe and Aaron, but Aaron didn't hear it. Moshe did, and he gave it to Aaron. So this is like a double specialty. Through those who are close to me, the chosen, special ones. Right? Now, when you say close to me, you could think physically close, or like close because you're related. Right? No. Because I means chosen. Okay. Al pnei kol ha'adam, kabe. I will become honored before the entire people. God carries out judgment against the righteous. He is feared. God is feared. He's exalted. Miskalis, and he's lauded. So therefore, as a result, he carries out a judgment against the righteous. All the more so against the wicked. Likewise, it says, God is feared from your sanctuary. Don't read. Don't vowelize from your sanctuary, but rather from your sanctified ones. Similar idea to here. Okay. Oops. Okay, verse number 4. Vayikra Moshe. And Moshe called El Mishael to Mishael, El Tzafan, and to El Tzafan. Bnei Uziel, they are the sons of Uziel, Doid Aaron, and Uziel is the uncle of Aaron. He's going to explain how so. But Yemer Aleihim, and he said to them, to these two cousins, Kirvu, come close, come draw near. Se'u is achechem, lift up, carry your brothers. Me'ez Pnei HaKodesh, their cousin, their first cousins once removed. Me'ez Pnei HaKodesh, from the before the sanctuary, outside of the encampment, right? Others, there's two dead bodies in the holies, right? They need to be taken out. So he's got Rashi died Aaron in 4. Aaron's uncle, Uziel Achi Amram Hoya. Who's Uziel? He's the brother of Amram. And Amram is the father of Aaron. And Moshe, of course. And for that matter, Miriam. Shemer B'nei Kos, as it says, the sons of Kos. Yeah. So is Achechem. Carry your brothers. Like a person says to his friend, Ha'aver's amazement remove the corpse in the presence of the bride. That you shouldn't disturb the rejoicing of the wedding with mourning. Right. So what this means is, simply put, there's two things happening over here. There's a death, there's a mitzvah to fulfill, the burial of the dead, and there is a celebration. This is inauguration day, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, in the second year going out of Egypt. It's almost been a full year that they went out of Egypt. Right? They went out on the 15th. This is the first of the day of the month. And it is not just inauguration, but it's like a wedding. It's like a wedding between God and the Jewish people. So the wedding, don't disturb it. Take out the corpse, the two corpse, out of the encampment, and it will be dealt with after the inauguration is finished. Which is a halacha. From there, we see that if you have two mitzvahs that come to you, the canopy, a bride and a groom, that they're getting married, the mitzvah to bring joy to that union, and burying the dead, you put aside the burying the dead, and you bring the simcha to the bride and the groom, as we see here. Okay, verse number 5. Vayikrevu, and they approached, they came close. V'yisu is noisam el mechutz lamachane kasher dibur Moshe, and they carried them in their tunics outside the camp, as Moshe had spoken. So Rashi is picking up that there was in their tunics. Like, what is the point in that? Like, why does the verse have to stress that? So Rashi picks up in verse number 5, noisam, in their tunics, ketainis, shalmesim, of the dead. So it's like a clothing for the dead. Because katanas is one of the priestly garments. Hmm. Shaloi nisrim to bigdeim. So this Milamad, this teaches that their garments were not burnt. Ela nishmasim, but only their souls. Kamin shnei chutim shalesh, like two threads of fire, shenichnas l'zoischat mayhem, that enter into their nostrils, and just like, the breath of life, so the soul enters and gives life, the soul enters into the nostrils to give life. Likewise, it goes out of there. So here, this statement was okay. Verse number 6. Vayem Moshe el Aaron. And Moshe said to Aaron, Elazar, and to his son Elazar, Isamar, and Isamar, Ba'onav, his sons, Rasheichem al tifrahu. Your heads do not the head's hair grow. Obigdeim al tifremu, and your clothes um, do not tear your clothes. But and you won't die if you don't do those things, or if you follow. Al kol ha'eda yiktseif, and he will then become angry against the entire community. Ve'achechem kol b'nei Yisrael yivku. But what should be, in others, that's if you do what you're not supposed to. But what should be is called Beis Yisrael Yivku, that the entire household of Israel should cry, Esreifas Asher Sarf Hashem, over the blaze that Hashem, the fire that He made. Rashi, Al Tifra'u, don't let your hair grow. Al Tigadlu Seir, do not grow hair. Mikan, from here we learn also with these prayers that a mourner is forbidden to cut their hair. Abalatem, but you, don't disturb the celebration of God. Right? It's a celebration of God, so don't disturb it. And therefore, you should cut your hair, or at least do not cut your hair. Laisamusu, lest you die. Ha'im tasukein, but if you will do so, Musa, you will die. Wow. V'acheichem beis Yisrael, your brothers, and you enter the house of Israel. Mikan, from here we see that the distress of Torah scholars who tell us alakol is placed upon everybody. That we need to mourn for them, right? Because what's going on over here? It says what should happen is, right? In other words, you're not acting like mourners. That's what Moshe is saying to Aaron and to his two sons. They're actual mourners, right? But they're not. They're not going to rend their garments. They're going to not cut their hair. But rather, the entire house of Israel, they should yifku. They should cry. They need to cry. Why? Because since these were great people, great Torah scholars, it is something that every Jew has to participate in, the pain of the loss. Okay. Verse 7, when Pesach oil mayid, and from the entrance of the tent of meeting, do not go out. Pentamusa, lest you die. Because the oil of anointing is upon you. Right? Remember, this is the day inauguration. They're anointed, and therefore they're going to go out with that oil of anointment. V'yasu k'dvar Moshe, and they did as the words of Moshe. Okay. Okay, and they did as Moshe said. Okay, now we continue. V'yidaber Hashem el lemar. So remember, there's a continuation, and that's why the second opinion says that what their sin was is they were drunk. Very interesting sichos from the Rebbe. And Hashem spoke to Are lemor, to Aaron alone, and he said, Yayin v'sheichar, wine and sheichar, intoxicated drink, al taisht, do not drink. Ata you, Uvanecha, and your sons. Yitach that are with you, B'voyachem, when? When you come, Eloi Amayid, to the tent of meeting. V'loi Samusa, and you won't die as a result. This is an eternal statutory law for all generations. Rashi in 9, Yain v'sheichar, intoxicating wine. Yain der shechrusei, wine that intoxicates. I guess if you water it down, or if you get Rashi wine that's like, 5%, learning Rashi, right? And when is it you can't drink wine to become intoxicated? When you go into the tent of meeting. So I only know based on this verse when you come into the sanctuary. But the outer altar is outside of the sanctuary. Maybe it sounds like from this that you could be drunk. But it says, never can be as oil mayed. It says here, coming into the oil mayed, the tent of meeting. When it comes to sanctifying the hands and the feet to do the service, no. The oil made. And there it also says coming into when you're washing your hands and your feet for the ritual washing of the hands and feet, malahal, and just as regarding the sanctification also gishas mizbeah, the Torah made approaching the altar of biyas mayin like coming into the tent. Afkan, so here too, say gishas mizbeah, coming near to the altar of biyas mayin is like coming into the tent. In other words, the Torah is making a connection between the two, and therefore not just going into the tent of meeting are you. If you go in intoxicated, are you responsible? But even in the service on the altar. Well, have them in order to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, or between that which is impure and holy, and pure rather. Well, have the Rashi to distinguish, to separate. This is in order that you should distinguish between a holy service and a profane service. Which means to say, if he would have done the service, it would be validated. Okay. 11. Olaheres is Bnei Israel, and to teach the children of Israel, last pasuk, all of the statutory laws that Hashem spoke, aleihem, to them, b'yad Moshe, through Moshe. Rashi, lahiris, to instruct, to teach. Limed, this verse comes to teach us. Also, shikr bahira, that an intoxicated person is also, not only can he not do the divine service in the Mishkan or in the Mikdash, but it's forbidden to teach, meaning give a halachic rendering when you are drunk. Yochel, I might think Yechai Misa that you will get the death penalty, meaning from the hands of heaven, if you're intoxicated when you give halacha decision, Talmud Leimer. But the verse says otherwise. Ato v'nech v'yita lois samusu. You and your So yeah, there we get Talmud Leimer, but it says other that you and your sons with you, that you don't die, so only as a kohen in his divine service is intoxicated, is he liable b'misa for the death penalty, meaning from the hands of heaven, right? But a scholar who teaches is not liable for the death penalty. Okay, let's take a look at what the Rebbe says here. The Rebbe asks a question. Rashi says they were drunk. They went into the sanctuary, and to know that that therefore others are being warned. Don't come into the sanctuary intoxicated. Rashi said, right? So it's known the wonderment and the difficulty over here. How's it possible that such great people like Nadav and Avihu, that Moshe said to Aaron, "Hu asher dibur Hashem shebikroi v'Kadesh," that with my close ones, those who are intimate and close with me, I will become sanctified. Right? And as Rashi says, now I know that they're greater than me and you. How could they falter in such a manner, right, of in something so holy and they profane it? How's that possible? How do we understand that? Question clear? Everybody? Yeah? So the Rebbe says, Yesh Leimar, not only was this not a Chil Hashem, but on the contrary, this expression of shtui yain, of being drunk on wine, right, intoxicated, comes to teach us about their spiritual level that was very lofty. Yain, wine, is a hint to the internal teachings of the Torah and its foundations. As it says, Nechnas yain yatzasod. When the wine enters, the secrets come out. So here means the secrets of the Torah. That's what the metaphor of wine is, which the expression of shtui yain, Nadav and Avihu, they were engaged in a very deep and lofty engagement on the internal aspects of the Torah, the inner aspects of the Torah, that brought them to such a sense of self-effacement because of the great light of the Torah, that they lost all their powers, their inner powers. In other words, because of the great desire that it brought to them to wanting to cleave to God, they so to speak lost their mind. Yeah. So in other words, it's because they got so deeply engaged, they lost all sense of like of self, like a drunk person. right? They lost all sense of self. They were drunk on Torah. That's what it means. And this fits in with what the Chaim explains, that they died because of the great yearning that they had to get close to God. That's why the Torah tells us, don't drink wine and get drunk. In other words, don't drink wine in a way of drunkenness. This is coming to hint to us, right? This is not the simple meaning, but what it's coming to hint to us, that when you're studying the deeper parts of the Torah, you have to be careful not to come to a place of kolosa nefesh, that your soul is about to expire, and that you lose all sense, all all of your, you know, all of your qualities, all of your mind and your heart. You lost it all, right? Is that clear? Hi. Very powerful. Another sikha. Rashi said that they died because they rendered a halachic decision before Moshe. Who's the one who's supposed to render halachic decisions? Of course, Moshe. He's the teacher, right? So the question on Rashi is, why is he emphasizing that they rendered a halachic decision before Moshe, their teacher? Specifically, why? How about if they did it before Aaron, their father, which was all, he was also their teacher. Because in a sense, you know, they have double duties to their father. They have to honor their father because it's their father, and they have to honor him because he's their teacher. Maisha is just their teacher, right? So, like, why is Rashi emphasizing that it's Maisha, that the verse, remember that it's not in the verse that itself that you need to understand. Right? So, so he says that the answer is kind of buried in a halacha. We find uh, that if a student is eating before his teacher, then he's not allowed to recline, right? So by the Seder of Pesach, we know we need to recline. But if you're by your teacher, you don't recline. Why? Because of the honor and the sense of awe and respect that you need to have for your teacher. Therefore, a son who eats before his father, even if his father is his teacher too, he still needs to recline. Why? Because we um, we 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 expect that the father is going to be Michael. He's going to be forgiving for his honor. Right? How many times as a child, as children, do we say things to our parents and our parents take it? They're forgiving, right? Because it's your parent. Another person wouldn't be. Your parent is. So therefore, even though your father is your teacher, And you're not allowed to recline before your teacher, but if it's your father, then you could because he will be forgiving of it. Like in other words, he's meichel on his honor. He's 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 not being exacting that you got it. So similar in our case over here, Nadav and Avihu in the honor of their father Aaron is not considered such a terrible sin because the father would be meichel. But that of Moshe, that would be considered a much more uh, grave sin. That as a result, therefore, he says specifically that it was halacha that they said before Moshe, their teacher, because in such an instance, there would be, it would be an egregious thing, and that's interesting. Okay, there's so much more here. Wow. But we're going to go to Tanya now.